First of all, I'd like to say thanks to the Center for Research on Education and Community Services. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Taylor, and the entire team. I feel very honored to be here on the noon hour curriculum to share my knowledge on improving the quality of post-secondary education for Nigerian refugee learners, just as Peter had highlighted during his introduction. So I would also like to express my thanks to my research supervisor, Professor Nadia Abuzara, for her exceptional guidance, unwavering support during this journey, as well as Professor Emily Reagan-Wills, who happens to be a member of my committee, as well as other members of my committee as well. I'm so happy to be here and also to present this part of my thesis research, and to engage you, my audience today, in this very meaningful dialogue on such a critical topic. So thanks a lot for being here. So to start, I'd like to talk about the CMIC, because everything I'll be talking about today stems all from the CMIC. The CMIC is an acronym which means the Community Mobilization in Crisis. It's actually research of practice that focuses on providing distance education for refugees. And it's an organization run by the University of Ottawa and was born out of the need to develop a distance learning program for Syrian refugees in 2014, when the university's president, Alan Rock, identified researchers to kickstart the program. So currently, the CMIC is being run by Professor Nadia Abuzara and Emily Reagan-Wills, the both co-directors of the CMIC. And the organization has really grown. It has grown since then, more into a transnational project across 5 continents that now supports community mobilizing more on a broader scale, and in addition to its original work on supporting access to post-secondary education, it has worked in Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, supporting host communities and other refugees. And this is what actually informed my project, because I draw a lot of inspiration from its methods, especially when it comes to community mobilizing, especially given my background, having worked in international development, because my learnings professionally has a lot to do with inclusivity. So as a project manager, the only thing that comes to my mind whenever I think about a research or a project, I think about inclusion. I think about doing with, not doing for. And when I came across what the CMIC was doing, I felt like this would bring me back to what I have passion doing, because I was with the United Nations, with UNICEF, providing support for the IDPs in Nigeria, from which the refugees we currently have in Niger had migrated. So it feels like it's an opportunity for me to continue. Even if in an academic setting, it makes me have that feeling of belonging, like I never really left, even if I moved countries, but I can still support this very beautiful work. So for context, my research is currently located in the Republic of Niger. And the Republic of Niger is located in West Africa, where it has faced myriad of developmental challenges, as well as security challenges. But on the top of the list is the security challenges, which comes as a result of issues from its neighboring countries. So at the moment, Niger has lots of IDPs, as well as Nigerian refugees. But the records today show that it has more refugees from Nigeria, which is a neighboring country. And this is as a result of these people fleeing the terrorist group called the Boko Haram in Nigeria, which its activity is currently in its 14th year, because it's been there for a long while. And one would ask, but Nigeria has some safe spaces or safe states in them. Why do they have to seek refuge in Niger? The answer is simple. Where they are located in the Bay region, which it's made up of 3 states, the Bay region in Nigeria, that's Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states. Within those 3 states are located in the northern region of Nigeria. And these states are seen as the danger zone. However, in the southern, it's fairly safe, but it's impossible for these IDPs to move to the south without being attacked by the terrorist group. So they tend to seek refuge or flee to the border, the neighboring country, Niger. So that's why Niger continues to accommodate more Nigerian refugees as we speak today. So while we move forward, I would like to invite us once more again, just before we delve in deeper, to share our thoughts on what we think about refugee education. I mean, it doesn't need to be right, but what your thoughts are, it would really help to, to take the discussion further. So I would once again share with us a link to another Padlet. And this is even more interactive. So in other words, if you don't have anything to contribute, and maybe you like what someone has said, you could just put, a thumbs up, a love emoji, just something to show you support what the person has said. But if anything comes to mind, please feel free to put your thoughts. What comes to mind when we hear about refugee education? All conditions for learning. Thanks a lot. Amazing. Disjointed. Ooh. Access to quality education, human right is a human right for those experiencing forced migration. I totally agree, Peter. This is amazing. Wow. Hope. Yeah, I like that. Hope. It's just one word, but it means a lot. Empowerment. Awesome. There are many dimensions to attend to. Yeah. Resilience. I agree. Because for you as a refugee or a refugee, for example, who finds themselves in that kind of situation and decides to want to get an education, it takes a lot of resilience, determination, you want to do this. Thanks a lot. Lack of consideration. Exactly. There could be, just like Peter said, there could be many dimensions to attend to. So it's multifaceted, not just one way to look at it. It's huge, but okay, not sure if post-secondary education is a right under international conventions. This came across when I was doing my literature review. And sorry to shock you, a lot of the agencies tend to think it's a waste of resources because they feel it benefits just a tiny few. So that's why you hear there's more advocacy around primary education and then secondary education, but post-secondary, they feel it's not a good investment. But I would talk about something related. Thanks a lot for bringing this out. And it's something worth advocating on. Okay, so I would now take this and bring us back to where we were. So we have said a lot in terms of what we think about refugee education. And I said something about the fact that my focus with my research is targeted at Nigerian refugees in Niger. So that's why I want to share what the current educational challenges for them are. And trust me, this can also be related in other contexts as well. So the educational system, starting with the educational system in Nigeria, the language for instruction is English. We're Anglophone, but Niger is Francophone. So language already poses a huge barrier for these learners, even if they wanted to go to school. Now, refugee learners are also met with struggles of fitting into a new learning environment. And I think this applies to even people who move countries, even if they are not refugees. It takes time to fit into a new learning environment. I was affected by that when I first came here to start my PhD, because the system of learning here is different from the Nigerian educational system. So I had a lot of unlearning to do. But my case was better because there were supports. I had support. I had a supervisor who was there to take me practically by the hand, to say, Eucharia, these are the areas you should be looking at. These are ways for you to fit into this learning system. But imagine if you didn't have that kind of support. So that's how bad it is for the refugees. Now, to top it up, it's also not very safe. Despite the fact that they have moved to Niger, it's not entirely safe, because just last year, Niger suffered a coup. So that alone heightens insecurity within specific provinces in Niger. And that's also part of the reasons why I couldn't go there, because the school wouldn't want to risk any of their students to such unsafe situations. So we had to look for other ways to ensure we do the data collection, other methods for data collection. So these are some of the major issues that poses educational challenges for the Nigerian refugees there. And also, to add to that, there are also economical challenges too. You want to go to school. If you're not able to get the scholarship from DAFI, maybe because you're yet to understand speaking French, it means you have to pay tuition for the schools that offer English in Niger. And now, coming back to the situation as a refugee, how feasible is that? So it's almost an impossible situation for them. In addition, Niger is very backward educationally. So bringing learners who have more like a learning advantage based on their country of origin back to a context that seems a bit backward can pose lots of challenges. And it sends a critical message to the world that education is not so much prioritized in that context. So things like this intersect to even make the situation very worse for Nigerian refugee learners in Niger. However, there has been some initiatives in Niger to promote or to support post-secondary education. You would have heard I mention DAFI earlier. So DAFI, for short, DAFI is known as the Albert Einstein German Academic Refugee Initiative. It supports refugee learners to get post-secondary education. And DAFI has a goal to make sure that there is an increase in educational enrollment to 15% by 2030. Now, this should give you an understanding about how low the enrollment rate is. If DAFI hopes to get to 15% by 2030, so we're playing around 4 to 7% right now. It is that low. And my research is just focused on one country, Niger. Now, Niger already has 30 DAFI scholars who are nearing graduation. That's amazing. But this 30 is out of over 700,000 Nigerian refugees. You have just 30 of them. There's no guarantee that this 30, based on the research is done, wasn't even broken down in terms of disaggregated into country of origin, because Niger holds refugees from different West African countries. So there's no way to say these 30 are Nigerians. So it's a huge challenge for them right now. Now, another entity that also does its best to promote post-secondary education is called the Connected Learning in Crisis Consortium, CLCC for short. Now, CRCC is a 40-member organization, and I tend to relate more with CRCC, being one who has worked in international development, in the civil society space, as well as with the UN. This is my forte. This is my strength. So the CMIC is also part of the CLCC, because these bodies come together to see ways they can support post-secondary education for refugee learners, because it is a huge issue. If at the global level, a lot of agencies or funding agencies doesn't think it gives value for money because only few persons benefit from this, then you see why the likes of the CLCC and DAFI see the need to keep putting this out, to keep promoting post-secondary education. So they do their bit by introducing ICT technology as a way to promote distance learning. So wherever you are, you'll be able to have access to education. This is a beautiful initiative, I must say. However, a gap remains. The CRCC has done a lot. DAFI is also doing so much, nonstop. But the little gap that is yet to be filled, which is usually not sufficiently recognized, has to do with the quality. And for me, I say this has a lot to do with putting the learner's agency at the center of the learning process. So if you want to provide me education, and if I were a refugee, I feel I will be more impacted. I would appreciate that initiative more if I was part of the process of putting together my curriculum or the learning materials, because then they would be tailored to my needs. These are unique needs. The needs refugee learners have are not the same with learners from a non-refugee context. And that is where I decided to adopt the open pedagogies for my research. And this is also what the CMIC does. It uses open pedagogies because in open pedagogies, it is more inclusive, because at the end of the day, I'm looking at promoting the SDG goal that focuses more on inclusive education. And how would I speak to that particular goal without talking about inclusion in my research? So that's where open pedagogy comes in to bridge the gap, because it focuses more on inclusive approach to learning, democratizing the act of teaching. In essence, the learner would at some point see themselves as a teacher, and the teacher will see themselves as a learner. It's all about an inclusive learning process where people feel free, especially the learners, to contribute to the learning process. They feel more like their contributions are valued. I mean, it couldn't really be like the best contribution ever, but speaking from a learner's perspective, I'll feel more empowered if my teacher said, come, let's develop something together that you could learn from at the end of the day. I would want to come to class the next day because I feel you think about me in the design process. So because of the collaborative nature of this, it also emphasizes that peers can work together and come up with sustainable initiatives to meet their learning needs. And how would you know these needs if you don't work with them, if they are not part of the design? So these collaborative initiatives tend to contribute to their long-term integration and stability, and could as well help create a sustainable livelihood for them and their families. So in terms of livelihood, that's when they start telling you, given my situation, this is the kind of course I think will better my life at the point of graduation. So you wouldn't, as a funder, you wouldn't just be there to tick your books, but you'll be there to make an impact. The one in which they're telling you, if you do this for me this way, it would impact me positively. And it would even create a spillover effect that even after the project has ended, you can still attribute a lot of things to it. to say, this is how this project had improved the lives of refugees. This is where this refugee is based on the kind of education that they received. So conceptually, the open pedagogy sits around Hegarty's framework, because Hegarty believes that open pedagogy should be more about people, openness, and trust. So the learner needs to trust the teacher as well as their peers. Connecting community. Peer review. So whatever we do together, if we were learners, I should be able to critique your work and you should be able to critique mine. That way, we keep learning from each other. So learning should be a continuum and it should be reciprocated, not just for the teacher to give to the student. It has to be more like a book weightings, and within the pairs, they should be able to review and critique each other. And it needs to be innovative and be creative as well. So within these circles, there are lots of ideas, new learnings that could emerge. And that's where creativity comes into play. It could be a reflective practice. Aside the classroom model, are there other ways we could reflect on learning? It needs to be learner generated, and this is where I talk about putting the learner's agency at the center of the process. They decide how they want to be taught. They decide how they could easily assimilate, understand what you are teaching them. And participatory technology, this is one the CLCC uses. Talking about promoting technology, but in terms of participation, I'd liken it to what we have, for example, let's say Twitter. Twitter could be like a good example of what I envisage in terms of participatory technology, but in a more academic setting where I could go on a platform as a learner and put in my own knowledge. The other learner puts in theirs. The teacher puts in theirs to provide guidance. And when everybody comes together, it could be firmed up by the teacher to say, you have done well. And now this is me putting all the pieces together, all of your contribution. Perhaps one day in the future, we would have that kind of participatory technology where both the learners and the teachers could come together to feed in something into a system for the purpose of knowledge creation and of learning, and also finally sharing ideas and resources. So the more we share, the more we learn. And this is what open pedagogy tries to promote. Now, some of us might want to adopt this, and I thought about including some theoretical foundations that could better help us understand open pedagogies, because these frameworks tend to provide more theoretical, practical guidance for incorporating it into design principles, or if you want to do a research that focuses more on open pedagogies. So the first is the studio, that's the Open Design Studio, but originally from just the Design Studio. So the Design Studio model is based on a number of theoretical approaches, not just one. It includes more like what we could call like an epistemological approach, the act of knowing, the act of learning, that can increase the learner's understanding of themselves and their environment, and the theory of experiential learning. You experiment when you learn. And this, in a way, fosters ties between the school's educational mission and the open emotional nature and self-exploration nurtured by Open Studio. So scholars such as Donald Scott, Christopher Alexander had contributed to this process. So that of Donald was from his work titled The Reflective Practitioner in 1983, which serves as a foundation to understanding open design studios, particularly in fostering reflective practice. Also, the other one we have is called the open learning design. So the open learning design refers to an instructional framework that emphasizes openness. inclusivity, and adaptability in creating learning experiences. It is grounded in the principles of open education, and it's characterized by designing flexible, learner-centered environments that encourage collaboration and sharing and accessibility. So scholars such as Granny Connell is known for her work on open learning design frameworks. So if this is something that interests you, you might want to read up more on it and also firm up on these frameworks. We also have the pedagogical patterns. This is the most flexible, I must say, because it's structured, is reusable, but it's all around providing solutions. So it's more solution focused to common teaching and learning challenges, originating from concepts of design patterns, software engineering. They tend to provide educators with proven strategies to address specific educational scenarios. So perhaps at the end of my research, it would be safe for me to also contribute to these pedagogical patterns. To say, if you wanted to do a research for refugees in Africa, you might want to adopt this pedagogical pattern. So it's a flexible system, it's open, it keeps evolving. And the last one, that's the community of inquiry, which I believe a lot of people might be familiar with this one, is a theoretical framework that describes the essential elements and dynamics required for a successful educational experience in online, blended, or face-to-face learning environments. So depending on where you want to use or what you want to use, you could adopt the community of inquiry because it emphasizes the importance of collaborative and constructivist approaches to learning, also focusing on interaction of three elements, which is the cognitive presence. This cognitive presence has to do with the extent to which learners are able to construct meaning through sustained reflection and dialogue. The next is social presence, which is the ability of participants to project their personal characteristics into the community, thereby presenting themselves as real people, and also teaching presence, the design, facilitation, and direction of cognitive and social process. So this framework, the community of inquiry framework, is grounded in the social constructivist theories of learning because it emphasizes that knowledge is constructed through interaction and collaboration within a communities. So scholars like Randy Garrison, Terry Anderson, and Walter Acker developed what we call the foundational community of inquiry framework of online learning that focuses on social, cognitive, and teaching presence. So in your spare time, you might want to read up more on these very interesting frameworks. So I'd like to share with us, in more practical sense, what people have done in the past with respect to open pedagogies and also currently. So open pedagogy model in practice. Here are a few case studies. The first case study I want to talk about is that of the CMIC, because like I had mentioned earlier, a lot of the things I do is informed by the CMIC because I draw inspiration from their work and how they go about community mobilizing. So the CMIC currently employs the open pedagogy principles in their emergency post-secondary education project. They do this because of how they collaborate with students through participatory community mobilization to develop open access online materials for teaching community mobilization skills. And this is one of their recorded success because they couldn't have developed those materials alone. They did so in collaboration with the learners. And today on their sites, you can also see what they have generated through the collaborative approach of making sure the learners are part of the process. Also, their focus countries for now is Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, including collecting stories from Tunisia, Egypt, and Mexico. So the CMIC is not slowing down anytime soon because they are really in top gear and it's a great work they're doing. Another agency I also found out in the course of my research, because very few people are doing this and very few literatures are out there on proven open pedagogical approaches for refugee learners. It's specific because open pedagogy is everywhere. It's not a new initiative, but for refugees, especially in Africa, it's hard to find one. But there are partners who are doing this in other parts of the world. So these are their case studies. So the next is this research organization. Now, this research organization got to Rwanda, which is Africa, but not for learning, but mainly for research. So it's called Global Evidence for Refugee Education. It's collaborated with 512 Afghan refugees in Pakistan and also 614 young Congolese and Burundian refugees in Rwanda as co-researchers, and managed to complete the research project, which was titled the Youth-Centered Longitudinal Panel Study on the Impact of Post-Primary Education for Refugees in Pakistan and Rwanda. So Peter, this comes back to one of the posts you put on the Padlet about post-secondary education. If you see, this research is done for post-primary. So there are lots of emphasis on providing primary education or secondary education, but post-secondary still needs to be amplified. Now, the impact of this research was the fact that structural and socioeconomic factors tend to obstruct refugee transitions to future schooling opportunities, as well as participation in post-secondary education is likely to increase the refugee youth agency. It's likely to do that, as well as recommendations for national and global education stakeholders. So they had lots of recommendations for these stakeholders, but we're hoping that the stakeholders would want to follow and implement these recommendations. But there still needs to be more work done in terms of amplifying our voices towards calling for an increase in enrollment for post-secondary education for refugees. But all in all, the learning from this process is the fact that it is indeed possible for refugee learners to co-create, to co-participate in researches, in learning. That's why I had to draw this case study so the participants or those listening can see that it is feasible, it is doable. So if you find yourself working with refugee learners, they have a lot of untapped resources, untapped knowledge, indigenous learnings, things they could contribute to the learning process. So the next group I want to also talk about, the next case study I want to show, is that of the University of Windsor in the US. So the University of Windsor has instituted an open educational resource initiative that amplifies co-design as a key element of its open educational practice, which supports graduate students learning in an online master's program. Now, the recorded impact is the fact that the students had successfully investigated several technological and ethical issues that confront schooling communities, written and published their findings in a peer-reviewed, unrestricted access textbook. So this is what students can do if you give them the opportunity to work together. And this kind of co-design practice should be encouraged in all of our institutions and also in the kind of work we do. And more interestingly, I received this email on the 14th of November because I had the opportunity last year and this year of being a part-time professor. And I tend to receive lots of emails from CLSS. And so interestingly is that the University of Ottawa is introducing universal design for learning framework and its principles. And this, in a way, is also part of open pedagogy, because the special series talks about inclusive pedagogies. So it's not just more about the teacher providing to the students. We're now moving towards a more inclusive pedagogical process. So for those who have enrolled, I have already registered, I want to learn more, professors who are attending would be able to learn how to create adaptive and flexible learning materials, activities and assignments that can cater to a diverse student body. So it means that if professors attend, they would have to be more flexible to seeing what are those unique needs of their learners, what are those unique needs of the students who enroll for their classes. How can we make it more participatory? How can they make it, more adaptive for these people? And also there will be discussions on inclusive teaching strategies for designing welcoming, safe, open and engaging learning environment that will benefit all of their students. And I said, this is some fantastic news. And I just had to include it in the slide because I was so excited when I saw it. So the fourth case study I want to talk about is one done by two Caribbean design educators, Noel and Niel. They published an article in Puerto Rico, which they titled Puerto Rico 2025, Design Pedagogy in a Time of Crisis. So these two researchers co-developed an appropriate design class with students in a rural village in the English-speaking Caribbean and focused on promoting empowerment and equity through critical discussions and reflections by the participants. The learners were taken through several stages of the design that included critical discussions, reflections, brainstorming around future dystopian or utopian scenarios, and suggesting solutions. Because this is just like putting the students in the situation of this crisis. How can we think, brainstorm in a way that we could come up with resilient methods to ensure that we can be resilient if the same crisis confronts us again in the future? So the aim of designing the curriculum was to help the Puerto Rican students working on communication design to move beyond just coping with the effect of natural disasters to thriving and taking actions through design. So the impact that was recorded was the fact that learners showed the activity was empowering, and it helped them empathize and understand the experience of others more deeply. So aside my situation, what are others going through in other parts of the world? I'd like to talk to us more this time about the advantages of open pedagogies, because now we have seen the case studies, but this is me here trying to convince you further on why you should adopt open pedagogies in your pedagogical work. So first of all, it's because it is learner-centered. So open pedagogy prioritizes the student's agency. It enables learners to become co-design and be active participants in education. This empowers the students, fosters critical thinking, creativity, and problem-solving skills. So the whole thinking is not left to the teacher alone this time. Everybody comes together to brainstorm. Even if at a very little level, they could be encouraged to become critical thinkers, to be part of building knowledge. Also, the flexibility and accessibility that comes with it. Open pedagogy tends to utilize openly licensed materials and technology, making resources accessible to learners, regardless of most times financial, because that's where CRSEC comes in, or even geographical constraints. This is where ICT comes in. So this is particularly critical in undeserved communities. Also, the collaborative and community building approach, open pedagogy tends to promote the peer-to-peer learning, collaboration, and shared knowledge as well as encouraging diverse perspectives and fostering inclusive learning environment, and also the cultural relevance and inclusivity. Through participatory learning, students can integrate their lived experiences and cultural context, making education more meaningful, applicable to their realities. And lastly, it's sustainable. Why? Because it encourages the creation and sharing of open educational resources. So whatever we develop together can be placed in a repository. Just like the CMIC, if you go to their site, you will always see what these young people have created. And I can go there if I want to learn more on, for example, community mobilizing. I can go there anytime, any day. Also, it tends to reduce reliance on costly proprietary materials, which ensures continued access to these learning materials, as well as also in challenging environments. Now, its advantages. How about looking at it in a crisis situation? Why is it a sustainable approach to helping to improve the quality of refugee education? So I believe, one, because it is adaptable to disruptions. Open pedagogies tend to emphasize on flexibility. It allows learning to continue despite crises like displacement, natural disasters, or conflicts. Learners can always access digital resources remotely, ensuring continuity. So depending on the agency who's providing this and they have the systems in place, they can always access learning, even when the classrooms have been vandalized. Also, empowering marginalized learners. In crisis situations, learners often face disempowerment. Open pedagogy centers their voices, offering a sense of ownership and agency in their education. How about resource scalability? It also uses the open educational resources and technology, which can be scaled to meet the needs of displaced, underserved populations without significant cost. And finally, I say community-driven learning approach is also another area which I find interesting, is the fact that it fosters resilience by creating networks of learners and educators who collaboratively address common challenges. So it is on this note that my research comes in to bridge the gap of enhancing post-secondary education, the quality of post-secondary education for Nigerian refugees in Niger through open pedagogies, as well as trying to contribute to the achievement of UNESCO's SDG 4, which focuses on inclusive, equitable, and quality education. Because I believe through open pedagogies, these can help us to address and meet these goals. And some of the methodology I am employing is one that tends to stem from my origin as an African. It's called the Ubuntu philosophy. So for many Africans, we have a way of knowing our epistemology focuses more on community-based collective learning. So the Ubuntu philosophy is similar to Mbiti's I am because we are, which emphasizes cooperation, working together, and crucially fostering good relationships between indigenous communities and researchers. So African knowledge system also emphasizes community and togetherness, guided by principles such as cooperation and solidarity, recognizing that collective success leads to the community thriving. So I'm also having participatory workshops, interviews, and also co-designed materials. And I'd like to share with us a very beautiful set of principles developed by my research supervisor, Nadia, because she is also one person that is a strong advocate for open pedagogies. And Nadia believes that to carry out the process efficiently, we need to be guided by the principle of cooperation. So we ask ourselves, trying to know who the participants are. Who are your institutional partners? So you just don't go to say you want to implement open pedagogies. These are some of the questions you need to ask yourself. The community, who are the members of the community? What's the relationship that connects them with your initiative? And how about the why question, the issue, the background to the issue, connections to the issue? You know, we have to write ourselves into the issue. Try not to see yourself as an external. You are part of it, because that way you display empathy. You see yourself as one of them. That way you can collaborate and work with these people properly. And also think about the approach, your strategy, the logistics, the timing, the feasibility, to ensure you're able to do these things. Also, think about accountability. Focuses more on recognition. So this part talks about relational accountability, and it focuses more on the good life, wholeness, balance. So this fits more into the community mobilizing bit of what the CMIC does, because the CMIC tends to also fall back on a lot of indigenous pedagogies that support collaborative learning and community mobilizing. And the interim and the final product, when you have co-developed, you start asking yourself what you have developed, how, the process of determining the product, how would it be disseminated? And also in terms of recognition, like what the students from the university did. They came together to publish the article. And that's also what I'm doing for my research. It's not only about me. I'm co-publishing with the learners, because we all did it together. Whatever materials we would develop together, I see them more like participants, we're like partners in this process. So whatever blueprint I will be developing, I would always ensure that they get the needed recognition for their efforts, and as well as for their inputs. Building on my anticipated contributions, I said about the publications, but not just the academic publications that will go out. I'm also hoping that this will contribute to policy dialogues on refugee education. And Peter, permit me to come back again to your comment. These publications will also serve as an advocacy tool to call out for more investment in post-secondary education for refugee learners. Also, we would also produce open educational resources for refugee context. This will be tailored to refugee context specifically, as well as an input into the Connected Learning in Crisis Consortium playbook. It is currently undergoing development, and the findings from this research will feed into it, because they are doing a fantastic work trying to provide this education. But what we're calling right now for is the quality, and that's what my research is there to feed into, to say, you have done a lot. How about you do even better to make sure that the learner's agency is at the center of your design process, that going forward, whatever curriculum you want to design for these learners, they need to be a part of the process. You need to organize workshops. You need to find out what their unique learning needs are to make sure that what we're providing can meet those needs. And to conclude, in crisis situations, open pedagogies, like I have explained already, provides sustainable, inclusive, and adaptable frameworks for education, which also ensures that the learners not only access knowledge, but remain active participants in rebuilding their futures, which is why with my research, I am hoping to reimagining education to help address refugee learners' unique needs. through anti-colonial participatory frameworks for flexibility to ensure inclusivity and empowerment. Thank you so much for listening.